I'd like to introduce to you our next speaker. Our next speaker is the CEO and Chief Information Security Officer of Aristotle Metadata. So Samuel Spencer, or Sam, is going to talk or present about enabling data discovery and understanding in the digitally complex organization. Please join me in welcoming Sam. Sam.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. So... Ooh. There we go. So as Jen said, my name's Sam Spencer. I'm a former public servant, and I now run a data management organisation working across government, across state, federal government, international organisations, trying to understand why data is so difficult. So we've got a giggle. That's good. It's a good start. Why is it so difficult for us to engage our organisations along this journey that we see is so important? We understand that data has value. We understand that data is important. What are we doing to bring people along that journey? And to do that, I'm going to follow the guidebook for how to do a presentation. And I'm going to start with a big, scary statistic that's going to get everybody terrified. So you've all had lunch. And I want to talk about the current state of data sharing. So big, scary fact number one is in the last 2 years, more data was created than in the previous 20. Like, massive amounts of data is being generated by organisations. It's being shared, it's being produced across organisations, published on the internet, and it's being used for decision making. So we're producing data at a phenomenal rate. And 90% of that is duplicated. And that's not because of bad systems, it's because people are doing their jobs. They're copying an Excel spreadsheet, they're sending it to someone else who's adding a little bit more, who's adding a little bit more, who's cleaning it up and putting it on the web. The amount of duplication through that process is actually quite staggering. The amount of unique data being generated is quite small. And that's because half of it starts to come from outside. So again, I like a little bit of interactivity, so hopefully lunch hasn't subdued you too much. Who here starts part of their data journey by grabbing spreadsheets from outside the organisation and bringing them in? Show of hands. No. Who here uses ABS data? There we go. So we're starting to see a lot of data coming into the organisation through this process. And the summary of this means that our data inventories are becoming out of date quite rapidly. So every 12 months, about half of our data inventory is either stagnated and has changed, or we're missing data through that process. What this means is for any organisation here who's gone through a data inventory process last year, if you thought it was hard then, it's going to be twice as hard next year just because of the changes to those systems, which means we need to start implementing processes now, or the work that we do to keep this information up to date is going to get harder and harder and harder again. And for the reason for this is actually quite simple. So I hate talking about products. My name's Sam, I'm from Aristotle. I want to talk to you about ideas and things you can do. And there's one thing that we can all do today that I want you to take on board. Who here again thinks of a data inventory as a thing we have? Who here has a data inventory in their organisation? How many of you have a data inventory? Okay, well, we're getting I don't know what this is. Right? Incomplete, partially processed. But we've got a data inventory, fantastic. So what I want you to think of is how many of those hands that went up, so really tall, like show the audience, who has a data inventory? Great, okay. How many of you have cleaned that data inventory up in the last 6 months? Who's updated it in the last 6 months? Okay, about half of the audience still. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of data inventory as a verb. It's not a thing we have, it's a thing we do. And the reason for that is quite simple, is if you went to, and I saw Snowflake's presentation, they talk about KFC having an inventory. KFC doesn't do an inventory once a year, they do an inventory once a day. They know what stock is there continuously and they have processes to make sure that we're keeping that up to date. So the challenge for us is to think about data inventory as a thing we're doing all the time. And the reason for that is it needs to be an action that we take. It's something that we as an organisation believe is important and always do, because if we don't do that, we will lose the value of our data. Every second our data stagnates, we lose value from it, which makes it harder for us to share because it's harder for us to talk about it. So the challenge for us is to build culture in the organisation so we maintain the value of our data. Because when we know what our data is, we know we can talk about it. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how do we communicate our data? How do we do data sharing better? So we're going to step through a couple of really interesting kind of ideas, and we're going to get to a really cool case study that I like to talk about. So the idea is data sharing, everybody has this mentality that data sharing is when I give you a CSV. I'll just give you a file, and then that's the process, is I give you a file. And I want you to think about really cool buzzword, the DNA of data sharing. I'm really proud of buzzwords. It's about discovery. So what data do you have in your organisation that I might be able to access? And this is what we traditionally call a data inventory or a data catalogue. How do I communicate what data you might be able to have? What data is in my inventory or in my warehouse that you might be able to use? Negotiation. So what do I need to prove that I can safely access your data? So why should I have it? So the example I like to use is as a nasty public servant who crossed the barrier and am now a vendor, I say I would like to access your data because what I'd like to do is I'd like to study who I can sell to better. Do you think I should have access to your data? Thank you. Fantastic. I'm actually going through a university course at the moment studying business processes. I'd like to get access to your data so I can better understand how people communicate and use data in their organisations. May I have access to your data now? Probably. Maybe. But we've started a negotiation process. So 90% of my journey about getting access to information is actually just about people processes. What am I doing to actually understand what data is there? And who do I need to talk to kind of get access to it? That final stage access just comes down to, yeah, okay, you can have the CSV now. And the area that this is working really, really effectively is New South Wales government. So we've been working with the New South Wales government on a 4-year program to develop the New South Wales Better Outcomes Lab Data Passport and the New South Wales Metadata New South Wales program. So a catalogue and a sharing platform that is designed to take really sensitive information, make it available across the firewall using open standards so people understand what's available, to develop a front door that users can use to request access and find what information is available for research programs. And I'll talk about why that's important in a second. But what I want to do is talk about how we delivered this. So first of all, we've been working with the Department of Customer Services to develop Metadata New South Wales. So in this platform, we have over 3,000 assets on hold that are being used to document and understand what information is available for researchers and government organisations and government employees for specific identified research purposes. The idea is that this is designed to reduce bias in data understanding by making sure that people understand not only what data assets are available, but what those assets mean. Minister Dominello, who I saw here a couple of years ago, talked about the idea of a New South Wales customer. Right? A New South Wales customer is someone in the state of New South Wales or transiting through New South Wales who receives a service or benefit from the New South Wales government. It's not a citizen, because not everybody who gets services from New South Wales are citizens. It's not a student, it's not a child, it's not an adult. It's someone who receives a service. Because the idea is that people receive services across barriers in government. When I travel on a road to go to a hospital to receive service from a teaching institute, I cross transport, I cross health, and I cross education barriers. I, as a citizen, actually don't care where jurisdictions and portfolios start and stop. What I care about is positive outcomes for me as an individual. And the idea is this brings together all of that information so researchers can look across barriers, across portfolios, to understand what data is available across those areas. And this is what's bringing about safer data. So now we can start going into those 3,000 assets on hold and start looking at what that data means. And this actually matters a lot to me, and we'll talk about why. This is a data set, this is documentation around sensitive individuals who receive out-of-home care. Out-of-home care is when somebody has been taken from their principal place of residence and put into care in the state, right? And it's a very negative thing. It has very negative outcomes for children and adults who are put in placement outside of their communities. And it's one of the metrics in closing the gap. It's very sensitive because it talks about individuals and their interactions with the justice system. And I can show this to you because it's published online. These are all of the attributes that are collected about individuals who go through this process. This isn't data, this is someone's life. And we're making it available. So we make that information available, and it's made available, and I love this phrase, easier, faster and safer. I didn't say that, I didn't make that up. This is a claim from the New South Wales government around how we're making that information more accessible because we can talk about it better. On the previous slide, we can show this is about case management. This is about how long someone was in a placement. Why did they leave a placement? So the idea is that metadata provides a really rich understanding about the data that government employees and researchers will get when they get access to that data. That's why it's easier, faster and safer. The second thing is it provides an ask once, use many principle around how people identify themselves to government. So the principle here is, again, similar to our negotiation earlier, why am I the right person to access this data? What did I do to prove that I'm a safe individual? Have I provided a passport? Have I provided appropriate training credentials? Have I provided appropriate information about how I can use this data effectively? And that tells you that I'm someone who knows how to use data properly. The second piece is around that safe projects, where what we want to understand is, am I going to use it for the right purpose? Somebody at the back of the room identified very, very quickly that if I'm going to use data for a marketing purpose, that's not a safe project. That's not producing a safe outcome, and that's not providing benefits for citizens. The idea is our 5 safes are designed to help us understand why someone needs access to that data today. And again, that's what the passport is designed to provide, is, are you the right person doing the right job? And are you producing the right outputs? So the idea is, again, we can take that metadata, that understanding of what our data means, and start to use it as a checkbox. Use it as a marketplace to say, these are the attributes that I'm most interested in. This becomes really important when it comes to issues of sensitivity, privacy, and exposure. You may not need all of a data asset to actually share it effectively. You may only need 3 or 4 attributes when you're studying aggregate information. The idea is that by providing that better metadata, we provide a richer understanding to users so they can understand exactly which data they need to reduce the burden on not only the organisation but on the researcher, because it gives them better access to more granular data that may be de-identifiable. And then we provide safer settings. So again, the principle here is the ability for us to use that API generation that everybody loves to talk about to scan our systems to identify changes that have been made to those systems. Can we reach into those data systems, identify where data has changed and how it has changed? Have the attributes changed? Has new information been generated? Has the data changed the structure? Have we added or changed codes? And apply that and send that into our metadata system so that researchers, again, have a better understanding of the profile of data that they're looking at before they get access. This is what we call the 5 safes. And I guess, like, has everybody seen the 5 safes principles? Am I kind of doing the thing where we're already talking about stuff we already know? So the idea is, again, like, this is why the 5 safes is useful, is for all those aspects. The idea is that we need to provide access to certain individuals at certain points in time for the right outcomes. And it's these principles together that are being generated not only by Aristotle, but through the Better Outcomes Lab from the New South Wales government, that's making access to this information easier than ever before. And that sounds like a lot of work, and it was. So it actually took a lot of effort to get to this point, and I want to talk about how we got there. So first of all, there was a lot of legislative barriers for us to get across to understand why we should be bringing that information in. Data has a high level of sensitivity, and what we've identified is that one of the barriers to getting people on board with data documentation is around the sensitivity of who knows where that data is. Fortunately, like the IRAP process and the IRAP principles actually enforce upon us this need for us to document what data assets we hold, where they are, and who holds them. So the principle of developing a data inventory and the principle of developing these practices actually starts to become privacy enhancing because users know where their data is and who's responsible for maintaining it. This is directly aligning with the New South Wales cyber strategy that requires organisations to have better principles, better practices and better understanding of what data they hold, who it's held against and why it's being held in that organisation and why it's not being disposed of. One of the safest things that we can do with data is delete it. If we're keeping it in the organisation, are we making sure that we know where it's being held and why? Is that all my points? Oh yeah, the ONDC one. Sorry, I updated these slides this morning. The other thing to note here as well is that this is aligning with those ONDC principles. So there was a recent change that I saw at an event here run by the Data Management Association that talks about how the ONDC is now trying to get states and territories engaged with this process. And again, the idea of having a unified Australian government data catalogue is a very, very strong principle and something that will, again, enable researchers to engage with this data by having these centralised catalogues that allows us to document that and share it in with these inventories so that we have that unified view. Now, the way that we did this was actually quite straightforward. So what I want to talk through before I talk through the timelines is how you can do this in your organisations. So again, I want you to look at these principles because we've got some slides, or we've got some handouts at the booth. The idea here is that we've all processed this idea of a data inventory as something we have. And I hope earlier today I've changed your minds and said a data inventory is something we do. So a data inventory is something we have to do now, tomorrow, and forever. We must continually be building that process. A data inventory isn't done, which means that it's not a project. It's a continuous activity. And the idea is that a continuous activity implies continuous improvement. So what we want to do is build a flywheel. So the idea of a data flywheel is as we get more data, we get more insights, which allow us to get more users, which allow us to get more data, which allows us to get more insights. It starts to become a self-generating engine. These are the principles that we can apply to our culture as well. Our inventory gives us a list of assets that need to be documented. Our documentation tells us who we need to publish this information to. Once it's published, we now start to see that 90% duplication. How do we reduce the commonality of our data definitions? How do we reduce the commonality of these common data elements that are being held across our organisation? And what can we do to raise that to our leadership to talk about how we can harmonise this and improve the consistency of our data? When we have consistent data definitions, we start to improve the quality of our data linkages because now we're doing it based on certainty, not statistical linkage ideas. So if I know that two data assets have the same information, I can start to link them with more certainty. This is not a marathon, it's a sprint, and it's like a garden. So you don't plant a garden and hope that it will work. You go in every week and you weed it. You go in and you water it. You go in and you care for it. Our data inventory needs to be treated the same. We need to have ways in our organisation to build a culture to ensure that people understand their roles and responsibilities. And that role and responsibility isn't in this room. It's not your job to do this. And I want you to take that in, take a big relief, right? It's not your job to find all of the data. We need to get the rest of the organisation involved. We want to make sure that everybody understands if I own one data asset, my responsibility is to tell you what that data asset is. It's not our job to find everything. What we want to do is empower these individuals to be maintaining the inventory on our behalf. The role of data governance and the role of data analytics is peer review and oversight to make sure that we understand where the trouble spots are. And the reason for this is it drives to change. So what has this actually done for Metadata New South Wales or for the New South Wales data community? Well, I'm going to quote them, and it's taken their data request process from weeks to days. So processes that used to take weeks of effort to find, link and share information are now being done in a matter of days. I think when we presented this to the Minister, he said months to minutes. That's a bit aspirational. But the idea is we're dramatically reducing the amount of business effort required to share information. And that's being done across the entire New South Wales state government. And the way that we did this was actually quite straightforward. This has been a 5-year journey, started in 2020, it's a long time ago, 2020, where what we did was we started with 15 users and we said, look, we want you to start documenting information in this research branch. That was then taken across the entire organisation. So the entirety of Department of Communities and Justice actually started to get involved. So we now started to see more adoption because they saw what good practice looked like. They were no longer afraid, they started to engage with that information. The idea is they saw what could be done, so they did it. This again led to further growth. So in 2022, we actually started a pilot of this program and brought on board the Department of Communities and the Department of Customer Services. They then took this on as a whole of government initiative, paired with the development now, not only of the metadata, but of a data request platform that meant that granular access to information was available. Last year, we saw the Department of Education and Training come on board, and they've already onboarded over 100 users who are on the platform documenting their information. So this isn't 1 or 2 people, this is hundreds of users taking on the responsibility of maintaining their data. And that led to the formal handover. So if you go to Metadata New South Wales, metadata.nsw.gov.au or datapassport.nsw.gov.au, you will actually see these systems in production, live and waiting. You can see everything that I've shown you today. And what that's led to is today. So what are we doing today? Again, that's over 3,000 assets under management. This means that there's, again, improved consistency within departments and across departments and better oversight of the data that's available. We've now expanded to 5 departments on the platform and are looking to engage more of the New South Wales government on this initiative to help people better understand why this data is important. And here's the kicker. So it was really helpful for New South Wales government. They got a lot out of it. Like, they were able to reduce the amount of time and effort involved in documenting this information. But that's not the reason why I care. This is the reason why I care. In March this year, the Productivity Commission came out with updated statistics on the Closing the Gap report. Who here knows what the Closing the Gap report is? Do I have to explain it? Great. Fantastic. The New South Wales is leading the way in these initiatives. Where other departments or where other jurisdictions are sliding backwards, New South Wales is actually reducing the number of children in out-of-home care. This is one of the most key statistics in the human services data set. And it's not because of the system, it's because of the processes and the culture involved in that. It's because of the transparency in which they have shown what they are doing. If you seek to understand how the New South Wales government is calculating and understanding and measuring policies that are making a difference in lives, the metadata is there, traceable from collection to policy, all the way through the journey. And what that's leading to is a direct correlation for citizen outcomes. That's why I care about this. Sorry. That's why it's important, is because this is having, what we need to see is that data isn't numbers, data is story, and data is impact on lives. So where we see good culture, what we're seeing is good processes that have led to the development of better policies and better outcomes for the New South Wales government. So, and we're doing that actually. So we as Aristotle are actually doing that internationally. So a lot of the processes that we've talked about from a culture perspective have come from a wealth of expertise with federal, state and international government organisations trying to understand why data problems or data challenges fail and some data projects succeed. And that's what the MAST methodology is all about, is understanding what are the things that we can do as a community to educate the rest of the organisation on what behaviours we seek to see and seek to improve. So if you'd like to learn more about the canvas and if you'd like to learn more about those processes, we've actually released those as Creative Commons. You can actually do this today. So you can take a lot of those learnings and you can start implementing them today to start building that culture, because that's the first challenge, is building an inventory and building a cultural piece about maintaining that inventory over time. So what are the key takeaways from this? Well, what am I doing for time? Perfect, right on spot. So first of all, I really cannot impress upon you enough, there needs to be a cultural change around what data inventory means. It's not a thing, it's a verb. It's a process and it's an action we take day after day to make sure that we always know what our data is. So the question is, what are we doing as an organisation to make sure users have the capability, people who are creating those data assets or bringing those data assets in, to report that back and let us know what's changed in the information they hold. Second of all, we need to build a process that encourages people to take iterative steps. We're not going to change the world overnight, and that was probably one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career, is believing a data project can be started and completed. This is a behavioural change. What we want to do is get people understanding that a little bit is enough, and that's the first step to a cultural change in understanding what our data means. How do we engage every single person in the organisation to document the data they have, and what can we do to tell them what is enough and what is a good start? And then probably the last one is that the value of data, we talk about it quite a lot, and data has a lot of value, but the second that data goes out the door, we lose control of it. So it's very difficult for us to give data to someone without going through these checks and balances. So the question is, what can we do to share information about that data? What can we do to share the metadata with others so they understand what data we have, so that we can reduce our own burden to not overburden ourselves with too many data requests, but also reduce the likelihood of incorrect data or invalid data going out the door. So those are the three key takeaways here. This is a process. We can make these changes today. And I'd really like to see you come by the booth and learn more about how we're doing that for the New South Wales Government. So thank you very much. And I'm now open for questions.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thanks for a great talk. There is, at the moment, within government, there's a big focus on budgets and spending money. And to be able to enable this, it requires, obviously, spending money on a particular, product that enables, an outcome as such. At the same time, we've got a lot of different competing priorities for running projects or programs to support the data culture, or to even help enable the discovery of that data. Where should we be, given the finite financial resources we've got, where should we actually be starting with? Is it starting with this and then rolling it out? Or do we start with the data culture? Or do we start with the infrastructure?
I think it's the culture first. And I say that as somebody who builds and sells infrastructure, quite honestly, it's a cultural change first. I think the reason why I like being invited to these is because I'd like to there should be something that you all can take away before you leave the room, and it needs to be a cultural piece. And that's why we've developed we've put as much effort as we can into those open frameworks, because it does need to be talked about and people do need to understand how they can do this. So one of the things that we talked through with that kind of flywheel effect is giving people an understanding at each stage, what are the responsibilities they have. Now, probably the one thing we could do is use that as an opportunity to talk about why this is a behaviour we need to do. Not a tool, it's about a behavioural change, and that's as easy as picking up a pamphlet and taking it back and saying, this is the behavioural change we need to do. What we need to do is build a culture where we will inventory on some periodic basis. We will start to publish this. We will need to make sure that people are aware of the processes and the programs in front of us. And none of that requires a tool. So I think the key takeaway is, what can we do to build that cultural change? And I think that is as simple as identifying a framework, not necessarily the framework that we've developed, but a framework so that people understand what their operational requirements are now and forever, because it's a forever challenge. We won't get it done this week, but what we can do is start the process today.
I think we still have time for one more question, if anyone still has a question.
I've got one here.
I'm just interested in what you've done with New South Wales, which is amazing, but how that interacts with open data. So New South Wales also puts out a lot of open data, are they a similar system or are they completely separate? How does it work?
They're separate systems and by design. So I think open data is, again, one of those very interesting principles of if data can be published, if data is open, and we see that with data.gov.au, where we can give away data products. Like there are desensitized data products that we can share and publish with the world. And I think that's a really strong, powerful message to send out about what government can do. What this is really around is, to coin a phrase, open metadata, in the sense that, again, the human services data set is very interesting in the sense that it is highly sensitive information about unit records citizens. Like, it's about people. Like, it's identifiable information at its core, but there needs to be a process to talk about that so that researchers can find it, interpret it, and measure policies around it. So data initiatives and data publication initiatives, I think, are very good in the sense that if we have a data product, we share it, without a doubt. Whereas where we have sensitive data products internally that we want users to understand how to request it, that's where processes like this become very useful, because then people can go, I see that you've got that, can I have it? And then that's the start of the discovery, negotiation, access cycle. So, I was just going to say, if you've got any other questions, we're going to be here. I'm going to be here tomorrow as well. And I'd be more than happy to share any insights we've got around that data cultural piece with anybody in the audience. Did it land? I always love doing these things. Oh, 2 thumbs up, fantastic. 2 thumbs up from 2 people in the audience. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you so much, Sam. Can we give Sam a round of applause, please?